Okay, so today we're going to be looking at Unity 2021. We're going to be using the universal render pipeline. I'm going to be going over the tutorials I've released in the past that are for beginners, newbies. It was Unity for noobs back in the day. And we're just going to cover those into one short video. And then from there, I might release some more content based off of this tutorial, so this is a good starting place. I could go into more advanced concepts. There are videos on the channel regarding that, but it's more niche. This is about getting more people into the engine and being able to explore with their own ideas. I've recently done this with university students, and I realized that it would be good to do an update of this for Unity 2021. Also, I did get a message the other day of someone who was interested in doing this, and it turns out that the 2018 video is very much outdated and we can't use it anymore. So let's go into Unity Hub and click New, and we're going to be using the universal render pipeline, and we'll click Create. While this generates in the background, I just want to share that the IDE I'll be using is Visual Studio. You can download Visual Studio Community Edition for free, or you can use Visual Studio Code or Notepad++, but really would recommend using one of the Visual Studio products. Universal render pipeline, high definition render pipeline, and the traditional render pipeline, standard render pipeline, are all three different graphic rendering systems for Unity. We're going to be working with the universal render pipeline, which is kind of in the middle of the two. Concepts can be taken forward to high definition render pipeline, and standard render pipeline is kind of deprecated. I wouldn't really advise you to start learning on that. It will seem a little bit more intimidating at first, but if you don't know standard render pipeline, URP is definitely the way to go. So once this project loads up, we'll dive straight into it. Awesome, so Unity is now loaded up. We can see in 2021 we have this little gizmo. We're just going to snap it up there. And we're also going to go to our console window. You just click on the console, and I'm just going to snap it to the bottom right hand corner. Customize this to any preference you like. I'm going to now move the hierarchy down to the bottom left as well, just to kind of give us some more scene view space. Then at the top here, there's a little visibility of gizmos. I'm just going to reduce them down a bit. They're useful to have, but they're quite intrusive. So this is the standard scene we get in Unity. Now, what we're going to do is straight up under example assets, we're just going to disable that. We then go to game object, 3D object, and then go down to terrain. Now, this system hasn't really changed since Unity 2018, but there are a couple of menu items that you'll notice when we're applying a texture that will be different. Unity 2021 is not optimized at all. It is very slow. However, this is the best way to future-proof this tutorial for years to come. The 2018 or 2016 tutorial is only just become outdated now, so hopefully this will be a pipeline that people can use for years to come. So this is our terrain. As you can see, it's got absolutely nothing on it. It's just got a blank texture. So I've included these two files. They're just Grass Hill and Rocky Albedos. These are from the standard assets pack on Unity. I will link in the description if you want to download these two. I'm just going to drag and drop these two into our assets folder for now so we can see them here. And we can see our terrain's now created an item. And this is a reference to the terrain that we put on screen. So let's click on our terrain again. It looks like we've renamed this to F. We're then going to go on to Edit Terrain Layers, Create Layer, and we're going to now select our Grass Hill Albedo. And you'll see here now it's assigned the entire scene with this. If we go down to Post-Process Volume and just disable this for now, it's just going to remove that effect, which is of the various post-processing effects they've applied to the scene. It'll just kind of make it easier for us to see and edit. Also, if we go up to Window and then click on to Rendering and Lighting, let's just drag this over to the side as well. URP has a lot more functionality, so I tend to like to keep this in its own little window to the side. I want to check out environment, and I just want to make sure fog is disabled. Again, this is just for just to see the scene a little bit clearer. I didn't like the way it looked. So let's go on our terrain, and now we have our grass on there. Now, if we click Edit Terrain Textures, Create Layer, and add in Grass Rocky Albedo, what we can do then is just click on this, and you'll notice we have our brush is a little gizmo that appears in the terrain here. I'm pressing Alt middle mouse to get the little hand appear. You can see the top right there. And I'm also just scrolling in and out with the mouse wheel. If I click Shift, we'll see that I'm painting this terrain. And sorry, left click, you can see I'm painting this terrain, and we're just getting that effect that is not grass. It looks like it's more of a dirty grass. Now, if I go over here and just scroll out a little bit, you see the terrain can sometimes flicker between blue. It's because it's quite big just now. So what we're going to do is click on our terrain and just modify the size of it on the right hand side, we have a little window here called terrain settings. We'll see that it's default set to 1000. I'm just going to change this to 100 by 100. And everything's in meters in this, so we're just going to leave it at that. It's 100 meters by 100 meters. The scaling doesn't really matter too much for this because we're not having a controller in or anything. So let's go up here and click raise or lower terrain. And what we're going to do is, you can see our gizmo is kind of showing us where the terrain will go when I press on it. That's really, really quite strong just now. You can see it's quite high. So I'm going to reduce the brush size a little bit and the opacity, which just means like the strength of the terrain. So you can see I'm just painting around it just now. And you can use the square brackets on your keyboard if you want to kind of get a larger one, a smaller one. It's very similar to Photoshop. And the best tip I have for painting terrain is to do it in sections. If you're actually going to be making a terrain to navigate around, you're going to be having bounding boxes anyway to kind of prevent the player from navigating too far away. But for cosmetic objects and hills in the distance, we just want to be doing something like this. So that's precisely what we're going to do. We're just going to have a little area here. Let's make this a little smaller, and we'll just add in some bit more spikes down here, and we'll just make like a bit of a passageway. What I will do though is I'll raise the terrain around here a little bit more intensely. Maybe not that intense. And then what we can actually do is just zoom in, and if we click shift, we can left click and we can see it's getting smaller. So what I'm going to do is just make this brush a bit smaller. I'm just going to make a little ravine here. You can see I've now carved a ravine out of the terrain from what we just created a second ago. Now this is quite cool because it means that we can start making a little pathway through this steep ravine, and as you can see the textures are kind of blurred here, so that means it's probably a bit too intense. So what we can also do is go to smooth height, and we can actually just assign a value here that we want the terrain to kind of start smoothing down to. That's doesn't seem to be working too much. There we go, opacity. So we can see it kind of reduces the edges of the terrain down a little bit, which is quite nice. It prevents all these spikes coming out of the map. You can just rub it down and it's just like sculpting. It looks much just smoother, less jaggy, more natural. So that's almost what we did in the first tutorial. Now what I am going to do here though is just to kind of give us a bit more texture. I am going to go back to paint texture. I'm just going to select this. I'm just going to paint a little path down here, so we can kind of have a little bit more to see and do. Okay, so we have our little path through a really glitchy looking ravine here, and just take some time, make this look good. Don't rush it too much, but I do want to kind of like show you what's possible with the engine here. So let me just kind of upcrease that a little bit. It looks a little bit more natural that way. So let's click on directional light. I'm going to press F and then I'm going to rotate it, just because we can see in that ravine it got really dark, and that's just because the shadows were in the wrong way. If we click up to game and we just click play now, what we'll see is we'll load straight into the game and we'll be able to rotate our little camera that comes with it. It's not a first person character, it's more like a flyover. It seems like the controls are inverted here, so this is kind of weird, but at least we can get like a view of our terrain that we've just created, and we can kind of fly around and see it in real time in the engine. So what I'm going to do now is actually just change our Skybox material. And the way we're going to do this is just click on Skybox. We can see we have one here. We're going to create, and then we're going to go to material. Where's material at now? It's still there. I'm just going to call this sky. And I'm also going to drag and drop a texture. I'll link in the description. And what this website does is open source. It will just randomly generate a sky. So you can randomize seeds, and we'll go for that one. That looks quite cool. So we'll download the Skybox. It will download it as a PNG. And as we can see, they're all here. I'm just going to drag and drop that into Unity. Let's right zip 7-dip extract files. And once this is what our cube map looks like, and our cube map is what we're going to be using to put on the sky. If we click on cube map now and go up to inspector, we can go under texture shape and change it to Q. So every time you import a texture, just make sure it's in the correct format. We're just going to go scroll down and click apply, and now we've assigned the cube map to we've assigned this material as a cube map, which means when we go into sky, let's click on this and we're going to create a skybox of type cube map. We're then going to drag and drop our cube map over here, and we can see now we've just created a sky material that we can assign to our sky. So let's drag and drop the sky up here, and now you can see in the game we have our custom sky that we just downloaded online, instantly put in. And when we add in the fog again, what we'll see is it's going to look a much more spookier kind of atmospheric environment. So good for a little horror game or something if you're going to make. Now I'm going to load up post-processing here and just walk through some of these. So as you can see, the scene just got darker. In Universal Render Pipeline, we actually get these, which are known as profiles, and they're an asset type, and you can create different types of asset types. You can see we have a couple over here, which basically dictates the type of graphics we want in the game. Do you want high, low, medium? It's going to change the light map. It's going to change the resolution of the light maps, the resolution for shadows. You'll see here on the right hand side we have like a ton. Atlas resolution, max distance. It's very customizable, and each one will have their own values assigned to it. And you can see under our sample scene, we're using Vignette, bloom, and tone mapping. And the cool thing about bloom is we can actually get quite a cool effect done really quickly. So I'm going to hide the grid here. I'm going to go up to game object, create 3D object. I'm just going to create a cube. I'm just going to put this cube down here and make it a little smaller. I'm just going to scale it up like that. Smaller again, scale it up. I'm going to rotate it just so we have like a little arc. I'm going to Control C, Control V, drag this over here, and just do this. And we're just going to kind of make a little diorama almost. I'm going to rotate this around a little bit so it looks a bit more random. We're then going to go back into our assets, right click, create material, and we're just going to call this glow. And on this, we're just going to go up to our, you can see it's Universal Render Pipeline lit. We're going to enable emission, and we're going to keep it at real time. And we're also going to set the emission map to be like a pink. And we're also going to keep the base map like that. We're going to turn the smoothness down and metallic map down as well. So we now have this glow material. If I drag and drop this onto here, you can see it kind of glows a little bit. If we went back to our post-process volume, and under bloom, disabled bloom, you could see it doesn't really glow that much. This is because bloom is going to basically apply the emission effect to our post-processing on the camera. And it's quite cool because it does look much more interesting and visually stimulating than it wouldn't have when it's disabled. You'll find that a lot of times people just throw in bloom and it makes the scene look significantly better. One thing I am going to do though is under glow, I'm just going to make this a little bit more pinky, or maybe blue. Cool. Well, what we'll do is we'll duplicate glow and we'll call one blue and one pink. I go down to red. There we go. So let's just assign that. Now we have our two little glowy objects here. Nothing will happen when you change these. Metallic map is basically Fresnel changes, so that's something you can look into if you're curious on it, the different ways light can interact with texture maps and so on. So we have our terrain. We've got some funky little items here. Let's go and drag and drop this cube into here, and we've now created a prefab of this. So the prefab just basically means we can now create a bunch of these on the scene without having to do everything we just did, and it will just allow us to clone things much quicker. You can see from this angle it doesn't look like there's much light. That's because we're getting the specular glow from the original cube here. Let's expand the glow. Let's set it to baked, our emission map. Let's just make the intensity a little higher, and you can see we're getting a much more bluey glow effect there. And if we go over to our pink one, let's just do the same here. Scroll down, go underneath emission map and intensity, and you can see the scene looks significantly like more effects here. So if I click play, our main camera, let's just make sure we have invert Y enabled so it's a little bit easier, and you can see now we have our sky. We've got these glowy particle effects. The sky isn't moving, but we'll look into that later, and it looks quite nice, much more visually appealing. So let's just add in a cube without any visual effects attached to it and just move it a little bit closer so we have an object to kind of focus on, because at the moment we don't have anything of interest in our scene. So maybe we could just do this and we can kind of just have a point of interest in our scene other than the ravine in the background. Okay, I might move these out a little bit because I like the intensity. I don't want to reduce that, but I also don't want to make it extremely boring to look at. Let's move this one over. Let's just do that over here maybe. Control C, Control V this guy. Move him back there. Let's just rotate him around some more. Across, down. Looks alright. Let's just set the material on this one to be glow 1, which I believe was the pink. So we have a little cube in the middle here, nothing special. Let's start playing with the post-processing volumes. So let's add another component, and we're gonna add override, and we're gonna go for chromatic aberration, which I really like. I like the effect. Not everyone does, but you can see we kind of get this kind of RGB values that kind of come out to the side. Chromatic aberration is basically distortion of light in certain lenses. Let's go add in color grain. Film grain can be quite nice. Be careful not to go too hard with it because you can make it look kind of rubbish, but you can definitely like add in some, just a little bit maybe. Alternatively, you can add in, you got Vignette over here. I think the intensity is probably a little bit too much, but you can kind of see it does the same effect. So film grain or Vignette is nice. Let's increase the smoothness, decrease it a little bit, sorry, so it kind of pops a little bit there. Do I want film grain? You can see it doesn't make much of a difference, so let's just disable it there. And let's go for color adjustments. Now this is one that you're probably going to see a lot of, you're going to see a lot of changes really quickly with it. This is just like your your Instagram filters or something, or Photoshop filters. Hue shift is nice as well. You can kind of start playing with lights, and you can imagine here now how you can link up with code to change all these up. So I'm just going to leave these two disabled for now, as our scene looks quite nice. Let's just click play and just have a fly around and just see what we've got here. So we've got a scene that now with the terrain that we've created and some global illumination, baked light maps with emissive properties on the materials, and it looks quite nice. So let's do something interesting here with minimal code. We're going to right click scripts and create a C# script. I'm going to call this trigger cube, and what we're going to do is duplicate our cube, Control C, Control V, and we're going to move him up using the global, and we're going to minimize him. And we're going to rotate him a little bit. I'm going to I'm not going to Control C, Control V. I'm going to add component, and we're going to create a rigid body. Now this rigid body basically starts to add physics effects into the game. So we're going to enter a trigger, and we're going to enable all the physics effects, and everything will drop down. So it's kind of a standard thing that I do to make sure everything's linked up as well in my projects. So we've got our cube here. We're going to go to rigid body, and that's all we're going to do. That's all we're going to enable there. And now we have our cube with that. We're going to Control C, Control V. We're going to move him over here. Maybe scale this guy up a little bit. Let's rotate him a little bit. Control C, Control V. Move him back here. Move him over here. Scale him up a little bit. Why not? Rotate, because it's going to scale related to the mass. Let's move him down a little bit for some abstraction. And all I'm going to do now is select them all and just duplicate them up a little bit. And what we'll see is when the game plays now, what we're going to find is that all these objects are going to fall to the ground. And as you can see, we have our first kind of physics simulation. Now, under the trigger that we just created, let's just call something, I'm using Control KD just to format it up a little bit. We are going to use on trigger enter, which will take a collider. And all we're going to do is when we enter a trigger, we're then going to enable all of the game objects. Now we can do this via a Unity script. So we're going to go public Unity event, public Unity event. Allow that to go. I'll call this physics. And if we go here, we're just going to make sure we import the correct event namespace there. And we're just going to invoke the physics event when we want. And all this is going to do is when we enter the trigger, we're going to drag and drop everything into a Unity event and then disable the is kinematic attributes on all of these game objects. So let's just go over to our the main cube in the middle. We'll make this cube in the middle our main game object, where we're just going to store those scripts for this. So let's drag and drop our trigger cube script into the main, and you can see we have physics here. Now this is the events. Anything that happens when we enter the trigger, we're then going to call all of these. We're going to drag cube number 7 over. We're then going to go to rigid body, and we're going to enable the is kinematic. We're going to set that to true. So that means we're going to set it to false, sorry, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to scan all of these game objects, and we're just going to make sure is kinematic is false, which basically means it's not going to be an object that's going to interact with the physics engine. At the moment, it's is kinematic. Nothing's going to happen when we click play, but when we enter the trigger, cube number 7 is going to get its is kinematic body set to true. So if we click play here, you'll notice nothing will fall from the sky, and the scene will unfold as expected, apart from cube number 7. At the moment, we don't have any sort of collision on our camera, so there's going to be no collision events. So let's go over to our character controller, which is just our main camera for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a box collider on here, and we're just going to use that as our trigger just now. On our main cube, let's just make sure we have a rigid body on this one as well. And we're going to set this to is kinematic because we don't want to interact with anything. So now we have our trigger script, is trigger set to true, and we're going to disable the is kinematic property on rigid body attached to the cube when we enter it. As you can see there, that we actually had a trigger hit. So yeah, if I click play again, we're just going to see that the trigger hit because that cube fell down. What we're going to do is just make sure cube 7 has the is kinematic property set to true. What could be happening is here our terrain could be colliding with this, so let's just click play again and see. Yep, so our terrain was colliding with the cube there, so we want to just make sure that's not the case. You can see now when we enter the area we're getting trigger hit, which is absolutely fantastic. And let's just make sure that the functionality is correct. So is kinematic set to true, let's just set it to false. When we enter here, that cube should fall, and as you can see the cube fell. So simply put, that's how you're going to get a trigger. You can then trigger animations in here by just dragging and dropping an animation object. And what we're going to do now, just for the rest of them, I'll do this really quick. Okay, so now I have manually added in each cube, set the is kinematic object to false. When we enter the trigger, I'm going to save it now, I'm going to click play, and what we're going to see is nothing will happen. We can fly around our scene, everything's cool, and then when we get too close to our cube, by literally entering the trigger, all of the physics has been enabled, and that's how we fired that trigger. Now, because dragging and dropping that is tedious, let's have a think about this. So what else can we use? Well, what we can do is just create an array of game objects, an array of rigid bodies, and then we can just call these cubes. And what we can then do is just go through each cube and just enable the is kinematic attribute manually. So we can also just loop through. We can, if you wanted to dynamically add them, you could use find objects with tag, but we're just going to quickly add them this way. Then we're just going to do cubes.get component. Actually, cubes.get is kinematic because this is a rigid body type. Cubes I dot is kinematic equals false. That's it. Now that'll loop through all of the triggers we add in here manually, and then we can also do our invocation here. But this will just basically speed things up a little bit rather than using the interface. You can see drag and drop's great for some things, and then also if you want to do it via code, it's also very useful. So let's just let this compile. This would disappear. Okay, so there's our trigger script. We can see cubes here, the list is empty. We're going to lock this in the corner, keep it locked, and then I'm going to select, is it cubes 5 till 13, and just drag and drop them into there. And then if we click play, it's going to do the exact same thing we just did, but instead it's going to loop through each object and activate the is kinematic effect a little bit quicker than dragging and drop. So I hope this tutorial was useful. I've done this kind of ad lib because I'm good. If I plan it out too much, you'll be missing out things. I'm going to edit the hell out of this, so hopefully it's quick. If you want to see another video, message me. It only takes one person and I'll make it happen. Thanks a lot.